The rookie broke protocol, and the old security guard took him down with a move that hasn't been taught in 30 years. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. We love seeing where these stories reach around the world. The military base gym was unusually loud that morning. New SEAL recruits were sweating through drills, tossing medicine balls and throwing playful insults between grunts. In the corner near the emergency exit stood a man most had learned to ignore. Old, gray-bearded, always in the same navy blue uniform with a security patch barely clinging to the sleeve. He carried a clipboard and walked slowly, never speaking, unless spoken to. His name tag read, Rick. To most of the young recruits, Rick was just another overpaid civilian, someone who had long traded action for an easy chair and pension checks. Some even joked he had never even seen a real fight. But there was one unspoken rule in the gym. Don't mess with protocol. Not because someone would get in trouble, but because someone might embarrass you in ways you couldn't undo. Recruit Jason Malden didn't get the memo. Jason had the cocky walk of someone who had excelled in everything but humility. He was strong, quick, and dangerously eager to prove himself. That morning, after another round of pull-ups, he tossed his towel on the security camera near the locker room, breaking one of the base's most basic regulations: never obstruct surveillance. Rick noticed. He approached slowly, as if gravity pulled heavier on him than it did others. "Recruit," he said calmly. "Remove the towel." Jason didn't turn. "Just a camera," he shrugged, smirking to his buddy. "Relax, old man." Rick paused, still as stone. Then Jason, half laughing, turned around and tapped the security guard's badge. "You gonna arrest me, Grandpa?" The silence that followed was chilling. What happened next unfolded in under 2 seconds. Rick's foot pivoted with surgical precision. In a motion so fluid it seemed rehearsed, he grabbed Jason's wrist, twisted inward, and dropped him hard onto the mat with a thud that echoed across the gym. Jason gasped, eyes wide in shock, pinned by a single arm technique that none of the other recruits recognized. The gym froze. No one moved. No one laughed. Rick let go, stood up without a word, and returned to his clipboard. The clipboard hadn't even touched the ground. A senior drill instructor jogged over, mouth half open. Where'd you learn that move?" Rick didn't look up. "They stopped teaching it in '94, he muttered and walked away. That night rumors spread like wildfire. Some said Rick was ex-Delta, others whispered about a classified mission in a place the Pentagon still denied existed. But nobody knew, for sure. Jason never joked again, and the next morning a fresh recruit taped a note on the gym bulletin board. It read, "Respect the quiet ones. They've already fought the war you're training for." The air at the base gym the next morning was different. It wasn't just the recruits who were quieter, it was the staff too. Even the vending machine guy avoided eye contact with Rick as he passed by, gripping his rolling cart a little tighter. Rick walked in as he always did, clipboard in hand, slow and steady steps, eyes never searching for attention. But attention found him anyway. Jason Malden, still sore from yesterday's takedown, gave him a nod of silent respect and moved out of his way without a word. In the command office, Chief Petty Officer Durham stared at the security footage again. He had watched Rick's takedown move at least 30 times, pausing frame by frame. What he saw wasn't anger, nor aggression. It was efficiency, control, muscle memory so ingrained that it betrayed years, decades, of discipline. He picked up the phone. "Get me access to Rick Sullivan's personnel file, clearance level 3. A pause, then the voice on the other end. "Sir, that file's restricted. Level 5 only." Durham frowned. "Level 5? For a security guard?" The voice didn't reply. Instead, the call ended with a dull click. Later that afternoon, a few officers gathered at the base bar, whispering theories. "Black Ops," one said. "CIA embedded," another guessed. "What if he's not even supposed to be here?" Meanwhile, Rick sat alone at a table near the back, sipping black coffee, a newspaper in front of him that he never turned. His eyes were elsewhere, fixed on a young woman sitting across the bar with a toddler in her lap. The child had his father's eyes. Rick blinked and looked away. Memories returned like ghosts. Uninvited, Afghanistan, 1994. Desert wind ripped through the valley. A convoy had been ambushed. Rick, then Captain Richard Sullivan, led a 6-man recovery unit into the no-go zone. No radio, no air support, just orders: retrieve the wounded and vanish. But something went wrong. He remembered the screams, the flames, and the code phrase that came through the last transmission: Operation Dust Veil Protocol Blackout. What they found wasn't a normal ambush. It was a betrayal, a trap laid by someone on the inside. Rick's unit never made it out, except him. And when he came back, there was no welcome, no medals, only silence. The mission was erased, the file sealed, and Rick was dismissed honorably into obscurity. He buried their dog tags himself. Back at the bar, a young recruit approached cautiously. "Sir? Mr. Sullivan?" Rick looked up. "I just wanted to say, what you did yesterday was amazing. I didn't know people your age could move like that." Rick smiled faintly, but his voice was flat. "That wasn't amazing. That was muscle memory." The recruit chuckled nervously. "Still, I wish I could learn that move someday." Rick stared for a moment, then said, "You will. One day, when it costs you something." The kid looked confused. Rick didn't explain. Later, that night, Durham finally managed to retrieve a redacted portion of Rick's old file. It was thin. Just a name, a date of enlistment, and one line under operations. Service acknowledged in classified engagements under Joint Task Command. Clearance, Omega. No medals listed, no discharge date. Just one note in bold: do not engage. Durham leaned back in his chair, heart pounding. He finally understood. Rick wasn't a veteran. Rick was a shadow. The storm came just after midnight. Rain tapped against the narrow windows of Rick's small apartment like fingers drumming with urgency. The base housing wasn't glamorous. Concrete walls, a single lamp, and furniture that looked like it had survived a war too. Maybe it had. Rick sat at the kitchen table motionless, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside him. On the table, 6 old dog tags neatly aligned. He hadn't touched them in years. A knock at the door, 3 short raps, 1 pause, 2 long. Rick froze. He rose without a sound, opened the door slowly. A man in a soaked trench coat stood before him. Clean-shaven, civilian clothes. But the sharp posture betrayed military bones. Rick didn't speak. The man stepped inside. "They're watching the files again," he said plainly. Rick nodded once. "They pulled partial records. Someone wants your story opened." Rick closed the door quietly. "Who?" The man hesitated. "Task Force Indigo. They think one of the old missions is leaking." Rick's eyes narrowed. "Operation Dust Veil?" "Worse," the man replied. Dust Veil was just the spark. Someone inside is trying to bury the whole fire. Rick sighed. He hadn't heard those words in over 20 years. Indigo, Dust Veil, Omega Protocol. Ghost names from Ghost Wars. Why now? Rick asked. The man pulled a worn file from his coat. Inside, photos. A young officer, a familiar face. Because the son of someone you left behind just got stationed here. Rick's jaw tightened. Earlier, that day, Chief Durham stood beside recruit Jason Malden in the gym. "You know that takedown move?" Durham asked. Jason nodded, embarrassed. "I still have a bruise." Durham handed him a faded photo. "Recognize the man on the right?" Jason stared. "That's my dad. He served?" "He was part of a unit. Only one man came back. The man you called Grandpa." Jason's face turned pale. Back in Rick's apartment, the man placed a small device on the table, an encrypted communicator. "They'll reach out soon. They might offer you protection, but you and I both know." Rick nodded grimly. "There's no such thing." Silence settled in the room. Then Rick opened a drawer. Inside, a small metal box. He hadn't unlocked it in decades. But tonight, the past didn't knock. It kicked the door down. He took out a folded patch, a black trident with a broken sword stitched beneath it, a symbol of a unit that officially never existed. He ran his fingers over the fabric, then looked. Up, tell Indigo. I'm back in. Meanwhile, deep within the Joint Task Command archives, a silent figure scrolled through classified files. Access logs, facial recognition footage from the base gym. He paused on one still image, Rick pinning Jason to the mat. He zoomed in on Rick's face and smiled. Then he typed one line into the secure system. Target reacquired. Sullivan, R. This time, the ghosts weren't just memories. They were coming back to finish what they started. The gym echoed with the rhythmic beat of boots on rubber matting. Jason Malden was back on the floor, this time leading warm-ups, his confidence slightly bruised but burning brighter than ever. Eyes followed him, not just recruits, but officers, too. But Jason's focus drifted. His mind kept returning to the photo Durham had shown him, his father standing beside Rick Sullivan. Same build, same posture, same hard jawline. He approached Rick cautiously. Can I ask you something? Rick didn't look up from the barbell he was inspecting. Did you know my dad? Rick stayed silent, then slowly turned to face him. I served with him, he said flatly. He was one of the best. Jason swallowed hard. Why didn't anyone ever tell me? Because some stories don't end, Rick said. They just go quiet. That night, Rick returned to his room and stared at the communicator. It blinked, twice, then went dark. A signal that meant they were already here. He opened a hidden compartment in the wall. Inside, a set of documents, laminated maps, and one old, dust-covered notebook with bloodstains on the spine. Written across the front, 013 terminal phase, the last mission, the one no one was supposed to survive. Flashback, somewhere in northern Syria, 1995A compound, an informant, and a deal gone wrong. Rick's team had been ambushed, trying to extract a double agent who claimed to know about internal sabotage. But the mission was compromised from the start. Only Rick made it out, wounded, and carrying the encrypted logbook now hidden in his wall. That mission had exposed a name, one that haunted Rick since. Kramer, a ghost operative who orchestrated friendly fire strikes and made allies disappear. A man who didn't exist in any database, except Rick's. Present day, Joint Task Command, HQ Kramer, now sat behind a desk lined with surveillance monitors watching Rick's every movement. Still stubborn, old man, he muttered. A soldier entered. Do you want us to extract him? Kramer smirked. No. Let him walk. The game's only interesting if he thinks he has a chance. Back on base, Jason snuck into the security office. He needed answers. He entered Rick's name into the terminal. Access denied. Classified. Omega clearance only. But before he could exit, the screen flickered. A single image appeared for half a second. Rick, young, in full tactical gear, standing above a wrecked village with a child in his arms. Behind him, a trident insignia, barely visible on his shoulder. Jason sat frozen. Who was this man? The next day, a package was left in Rick's locker. No return label. Inside, a patch, his unit's black trident, sliced clean across. A message. They knew he was active again, and they wanted him to remember. This time, no one gets out. Rick stood in the empty gym that night, staring at the patch. Jason approached slowly. I saw a photo of you carrying a kid. Rick didn't deny it. Jason continued. That boy looked just like me. Rick looked away. Jason stepped closer. Tell me, was it? Rick stopped him with a whisper. Yes. The power went out at 2:17 a.m. No warning, no thunderstorm. Just the lights dying all at once. like the base itself was holding its breath. Rick was already awake. He'd learned to sleep light. Old habits don't die, especially not the ones that had kept him alive. He moved silently through his room, opened the drawer by muscle memory, and retrieved the small pistol hidden beneath false lining. It wasn't regulation. But Rick hadn't trusted regulation since '95. He checked the window. Movement. Fast. Calculated. Too smooth for a prank. Too precise for kids. They were here. Meanwhile, Jason stirred in his bunk. A sharp knock at the door, then a voice. Security, random bunk check. Jason opened it. 2 men in black uniforms stood there. No insignia. No smiles. Something was off. Before he could react, one grabbed him by the shoulder. The other raised a silenced weapon. But before a shot could be fired, crash! The window behind them exploded inward. Rick came flying through, landing like a shadow. In a blink, one attacker was disarmed, the other thrown against the wall. Jason stared in shock. "Stay down," Rick barked, taking the silencer and flipping it backwards into the man's throat with mechanical precision. The silence returned. Jason's ears rang anyway. Later that night, in an abandoned warehouse outside the base, Rick paced before a flickering oil lamp. Jason sat nearby, still trying to understand what had happened. "Who were they?" Jason asked. "Operatives," Rick replied. "Not ours. Not anymore." "Why me?" Rick paused. "Because you're leverage, and because of your father." Jason leaned forward. "You keep saying that. What really happened back then?" Rick opened his notebook. He flipped to a page stained with dried blood and circled initials. RM. "Your father was the only reason I survived. The only reason anyone made it out of terminal phase. He covered the exit while I carried a wounded operative to safety." Jason swallowed. "And he died?" Rick didn't answer directly. "I held his dog tags for 3 hours before I could radio extraction," he said. "And I made a promise. If I ever met his son, I'd make sure he never ended up in the shadows, like we did." Jason stared at him. "And now?" Rick looked down at his shaking hands. "Now the shadows are coming for you too." At Joint Task HQ, Kramer reviewed the failed mission footage. He interfered, a soldier reported. The janitor neutralized both agents. Kramer smirked. "Good. Let him think he's ahead. This isn't about brute force anymore." He turned to a sealed file. "Activate Protocol 13. Bring the boy in. Alive." Back in the warehouse, Jason stood up. "I'm not hiding." Rick glanced at him. "You don't even know what this is." "I know I'm done living half-truths. If my father was a hero, then I want to know everything. I want to fight for that name." Rick nodded slowly. "Then we have to move. Because they won't come. With 2 next time." He lifted his bag, reached behind a wooden crate and pulled out a sealed case. Inside, a trident patch, a worn sidearm, and 2 sets of old dog tags, his and another's. Jason read the second name, Malden, his father. They were no longer just survivors. They were the last 2 members of a story no one wanted to be told, and they were ready to finish it. The rain fell hard over the abandoned airstrip, bouncing off rusted hangars and broken concrete. Somewhere beneath the layers of time, secrets waited, buried, forgotten, and ready to burn their way back to the surface. Rick adjusted his hood and checked his watch. 3:42 a.m. Jason crouched behind a steel pillar, nervously clutching the sidearm Rick had given him. "You sure the files are still here?" he whispered. Rick didn't answer immediately. His gaze was locked on the shadowy outline of the old control tower. "They were left for dead, just like us," he muttered. "But ghosts have long memories." Inside the tower, dust danced in the beam of Jason's flashlight. Rick moved ahead silently, each step careful, rehearsed. It had been nearly 3 decades, but the weight of that final mission still followed him like a second skin. Behind a collapsed locker wall, Rick found it, a sealed crate, welded shut. He pulled a small plasma cutter from his coat and started carving. Jason watched the hall. Suddenly, movement. Two black-clad operatives emerged from the far stairs. No insignia. Same cold precision as before. Jason raised his weapon, but Rick had already seen them. He kicked the crate aside, flipped, forward into a shoulder roll and swept the legs from one agent in a single fluid move. Jason fired instinctively. One shot grazed the second attacker's arm, giving Rick just enough time to slam his elbow into the man's temple. The hallway fell quiet again, just breathing and distant thunder. Rick looked at Jason. "You're getting faster." Jason smirked. "You're not bad for a janitor." Back downstairs, they dragged the crate to a nearby service truck. Inside were old encrypted drives and 3 black folders labeled Omega-13 Terminal, and one with no label, just a blood-red trident stamped on the front. Rick opened the trident file first. Photos, satellite images, rosters of SEAL teams, names crossed out. Jason's father was there. Rick's was missing, but what shocked Rick most was the final image. Kramer, younger, uniformed, smiling beside top brass. He wasn't rogue, he was protected. "They knew," Rick whispered. "They all knew." Jason leaned over. "What is this?" "It's proof," Rick said, holding up a declassified memo. Kramer wasn't just part of the system, he was the system. Suddenly, the truck's engine roared. Rick had hot-wired it in under 20 seconds, tossing the files into the back. Jason jumped into the passenger seat as Rick gunned it out of the hangar. In the rearview mirror, headlights began to appear. 2 black SUVs, no plates. "They're here," Jason muttered. Rick didn't flinch. "Good. Let them follow." They sped into the forest road behind the base, weaving between pines and potholes. Jason clutched the files like they were sacred. "I don't get it," he shouted over the wind. "Why would Kramer come after you now?" Rick's voice was steel. "Because I survived, and I have the one thing that can bury him." "What?" Rick's eyes narrowed on the road ahead. "The truth." By sunrise, they reached a remote cabin on a mountain ridge. Rick had built it years ago, off the grid, powered by solar and silence. Inside, he opened a steel lockbox built into the floor. He placed the trident file inside, alongside dog tags, letters, and one final object. A worn cassette tape labeled Echoes. Jason stared at it. "What's on there?" Rick looked at him. Confession. Or betrayal. Depends who's listening. That night, while Jason slept, Rick sat on the porch, staring into the woods. He wasn't a soldier anymore. But the war was far from over, and this time, it was personal. The cabin's walls creaked under a rising storm. Jason sat at the table, reviewing the trident file again. Each name, each mission, each redacted paragraph like a punch to the gut. These weren't just soldiers. They were ghosts, with unfinished stories. Rick entered from the back room holding an old military radio encased in a lead-proof shell. "You still think anyone will believe us?" Jason asked. Rick placed the radio down, eyes sharp. "We don't need them to believe. We need them to listen." He pulled out a contact card, faded, torn at the edges. The name on it, Lara Chase, a war correspondent turned rogue broadcaster, known for exposing military cover-ups. If anyone could help, it was her. 2 hours later, Jason sat across from Rick in the pickup truck, which now held a hidden compartment filled with documents, the tape-marked Echoes, and backup drives. "She'll meet us in the city. 1 hour. But she warned us. Others are watching her too," Rick explained. As they drove through the rain, Jason finally asked, "Why her? Why now?" Rick gripped the wheel. "Because I promised your father I'd carry the truth. But promises mean nothing if no one hears the truth when it finally screams." In the city, the skyline shimmered under neon and drizzle. They parked inside a garage near the news station that used to carry Lara's show, now abandoned. She operated out of a makeshift studio 2 blocks away. Jason scanned their surroundings. "Feels like a trap." Rick smiled faintly. It always does. They moved fast, two shadows slipping between puddles and steel. Inside the studio, dim light glowed behind blackout curtains. Lara stood by a laptop, headphones around her neck. Her eyes met Rick's, and for a moment there was silence. Then, 30 years, and you still carry the storm with you. Rick handed her the tape. This ends it. They uploaded the contents, encrypted documents, the audio confession, recorded by a dying SEAL commander implicating Kramer in Operation Terminal. Lara's eyes widened. This is treason. No, Rick said. This is redemption. She hesitated. If I go live with this, I lose everything. Rick locked eyes with her. That's why it has to be you. Outside, a black SUV pulled up. Two figures stepped out, dressed like civilians, but Rick knew the stance, the posture. Operatives. Get it on the air, he told Lara. No matter what happens. Gunfire shattered the silence. Jason ducked instinctively as the windows exploded inward. Rick tackled Lara to the floor while returning fire through the broken frame. Jason fired too, twice, then a third. One assailant dropped. The second pulled back into the shadows. Back door now, Rick barked. They bolted down the alley, rain soaking their clothes, breath sharp in their lungs. Lara clutched the laptop against her chest. I didn't finish. The upload, she shouted. Rick grabbed her arm. There's one last chance. They reached a radio tower in the hills outside the city. A backup transmitter. Rick had worked on it during his early retirement. A ghost project for a day just like this. Inside the control room, Lara plugged in. Jason stood watch, eyes scanning, the tree line. Rick placed a hand on his shoulder. You did good, kid. Jason turned. We're not done yet. A red light blinked on the console. Signal's live, Lara said, her voice shaking. The world's listening. She hit play. Rick's voice echoed through the tower, then the commander's tape. Confession, names, coordinates, everything. Jason closed his eyes. It was out. But down the hill, more lights were coming. Headlights. Lots of them. Rick chambered around. Now, we see who wants the truth buried, and who's willing to stand against the silence. The first bullets hit the tower's metal siding like hail. Inside the control room, Lara flinched as sparks flew from the transmitter. Jason ducked, pulling her behind the steel console. Rick didn't move. He stood at the window, watching the convoy approach, 6 vehicles, headlights piercing the mist. He took a slow breath. They don't want it out there, but it's already out. Lara's voice trembled. The stream's still live, but they'll destroy the backup server if they get inside. Rick turned to her. Then we hold the door. Jason's hand trembled on the grip of his sidearm. Rick, we can't win a war with 2 pistols. Rick placed a firm hand on his shoulder. We're not here to win. We're here to make them lose control. Outside, the agents spread out. No insignia. No communication, just tactical efficiency. They weren't here to arrest anyone. They were here to erase history. The first breach team hit the lower stairwell. Jason lobbed a flashbang. The boom shook the floor. Rick fired down the stairwell, slowing their advance. Seal the back door, Rick shouted. Lara jammed a wrench into the door frame and activated the firewall on her terminal. The stream continued broadcasting. The confession, the files, and a video Rick had added just minutes before. A montage of the fallen, the betrayed, the forgotten. Faces, names, and the haunting voice of the dying SEAL commander. It was no longer just a file. It was a legacy. The attackers regrouped. Rick knew the next wave would be lethal. He grabbed a wired headset and clicked into the live stream mic. If you're hearing this, it's because someone believed truth matters more than silence. We served, we sacrificed, and we were betrayed, but not by enemies. He paused. They wore the same flag. The silence that followed was heavier than gunfire. The breach came fast. 3 operatives burst in. 1 through the window, 2 through the side wall. Jason took a hit to the shoulder but dropped one. Lara crawled behind the broadcast rig, shielding the hard drive. Rick faced the last two, no hesitation, no regret. One raised his weapon. But Rick was faster. He dropped the first with a double tap, then lunged at the second, slamming both of them through a pile of crates. Pain surged through his ribs, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. When the smoke cleared, Jason lay bleeding but conscious. Lara was safe. And Rick stood in the doorway, breathing hard, gun lowered. The radio console blinked. Upload complete. The world had seen it. 3 days later, Lara stood at a national press conference. The footage had gone viral. Lawmakers demanded investigations. Kramer had vanished. Anonymous insiders began leaking more. Jason watched from a hospital bed, arm in. A sling beside him was a box. Inside, a dog tag, a cassette marked Echoes, and a handwritten note. If truth costs everything, it was still worth it. Jason closed the lid. Some stories don't end. They echo. 6 months later, a new memorial was unveiled. No names, just a bronze plaque that read, "For those who served in silence and spoke only when it mattered." Among the crowd stood Jason, and behind him in the shadows, an old man in a faded security uniform. He nodded once, then vanished into the crowd. Thank you for watching this story. If it moved you, consider subscribing to Soulvein Stories, because some truths deserve to be heard even in silence.